All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are really excited for this conversation about cancer and financial toxicity, and we have two really great panelists with us today. Just really quick, I want to introduce myself. My name is Kate, and I'm the outreach representative with Help Hope Live. Help Hope Live is a national nonprofit that supports community-based fundraising for people with unmet medical bills and related costs due to cell and organ transplant, catastrophic injury, and catastrophic illness. And cancer is in that catastrophic illness category. So our panelists today are Dr. Beverly Zavaleta and Samantha Watson. So they are both cancer survivors and they are experts on this topic. So we're really excited to have them with us today. So just to get this conversation started, I would love for you both to just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your experience with cancer and financial toxicity, and just tell us kind of how you got to where you are today. So Beverly, if you would like to go first.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Beverly Savalettas. I am a board certified family physician. And I guess my story starts back in 2015 when I was diagnosed with triple negative breast cancer, which, as many of your viewers might know, is a very aggressive form of breast cancer. And I was 43 years old at the time. I'm married and I have two children, and the kids were pretty young at that time. I was working full time as a physician with a hospitalist group, which is a very demanding job, as we've all learned this past couple of years. Healthcare workers are, right there, front lines, exposed to a lot of things. So when I was diagnosed, I went right into chemotherapy, which is the standard of care treatment for triple negative breast cancer. And I had to go on to disability because of the type of work that I did. I was doing hospital shifts that were 12 hours a day, sometimes longer. I was exposed to a lot of germs at my job. So my oncologist really said there was no way that I could continue to work. There was no type of work I could do that was safe for me during my treatment. So right off the bat, I was, because I had to stop work completely, that was a strain on the family. So I was out of work for a total of 11 months. And we had to really rework things within the family in terms of finances. And my husband, he works as well. He has a business and he was able to continue working, but we had to really rely on our friends and family for a lot of help in terms of the logistics of me getting my treatment and also keeping everything running. I think one of the things that for us was extremely important was I did have access to disability insurance. And so for us, that was just a lifesaver because we were able to keep functioning. And I know that not everybody has that, but it was financially something that helped us essentially not have to do anything drastic, like sell our house or sell a car, or take out a loan. And my work lately in the cancer community and talking to people and families that are going through cancer treatment, very frequently people have to make such drastic measures. Sell a house, sell a car, get a second job, take out a loan, or try to raise money through organizations such as Help Hope Live. And so for my own story, like I said, that insurance that I was able to have was really just a lifesaver in terms of keeping us afloat during that time. But I'll say, my husband will say that that's the year that he worked hardest in his life. And it's a huge, huge strain, in addition to just everything that I was going through physically and emotionally, for him to have the strain of that additional work is something that is not unique. I mean, I can't think of any family having gone through cancer that doesn't have the financial strain of the additional costs. So I think I'll leave it there and let Sam talk about her story, and then maybe we can touch back on some of the other points about work we've done since then. But that's the beginning of the story.
Thanks, Beverly. So, Kate, thank you again for inviting me to do this. It's such an honor to be back with this organization that was a lifeline for me over 20 years ago. So when I was in college, I was diagnosed with bone cancer, and I left school, went to New York, went through a bunch of chemo, excuse me, and then had to relearn to walk, had to go through a ton of physical therapy and all that stuff. And I really, if we're being honest, had no sense of how complicated billing and access to care and all of that was, because I was incredibly privileged. My mom was an oncology nurse at Sloan Kettering for her whole career, and our whole network was in New York because that's where I grew up. And so by all accounts, I was as lucky as I could have been, obviously within a very unlucky context. But what happened was that I started to meet young adults that didn't have those same supports. And so I went back to school, and I was getting ready to graduate and wasn't feeling great. I kept getting sick, and I was exhausted all the time. And right before my 23rd birthday, I was diagnosed with an early form of leukemia. So I thankfully was able to finish school, and I was told I needed a bone marrow transplant. But while they looked for a donor, I was able to finish school and sort of regroup a little bit. I moved home and did, the things that I wanted to do. And, so I went through an unrelated bone marrow transplant in August of 2001. I've had to think about that for a second. It's been a lot of years. I've been very fortunate, but I went through a bone marrow transplant, had to stay in the hospital for about 3 months, and then had to stay in New York close to the hospital for a year. And again, I was really lucky because my parents were there, my family was there, my friends were there, we had a place to live. And it was at that time that the National Transplant Assistance Fund, which went on to become Help Hope Live, had a program in place where people could help us with our everyday expenses. And so I think at the time, it was certainly something I took for granted, how expensive monthly rent was and groceries and all of the things. But we had all the support that we needed so that we weren't going bankrupt and we didn't have to max out credit cards. And when I started sort of getting back on my feet and figuring out my next move, I moved back to Boston, I got a job, I had a roommate. It started to dawn on me that, Beverly, just as you were saying that disability insurance was sort of the key piece for you, having a mom who was an oncology nurse was the key piece for me, because about 2 years after my transplant, I got a bill in the mail for $275,000. And it was absurd. I mean, I remember opening up the mail and my mom and I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. And no one in their right mind at any age, especially someone who's not even 25, should get that kind of bill in the mail. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the work that I've done since, but it started to dawn on me that without any number of the supports in place that I was really lucky to have, I unquestionably would have been bankrupt before I turned 25. And unfortunately, that's the story for a lot of young adults. And so I think that perspective that sort of I bring to this conversation, in addition to being a cancer survivor, is having been a patient advocate within the young adult cancer community for all of these years. And unfortunately, those stories are still happening. So, that's sort of my personal experience, but I'm sure we'll touch on a lot more stuff going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you both for sharing both of those things. And just to dive a little deeper into the financial aspect of cancer, during your experience, what did you find most challenging as it relates to financial parts of cancer, affording treatment, and the medical bills that you received?
Beverly, you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So I think for me, so I did have medical insurance, first of all, health insurance to cover the bills. And we, in terms of doing the finances, my husband, it had a business and accounting background. So we were fairly well positioned with being able to understand, and also me being in healthcare, just as your Samantha, your mother was an oncology nurse, having some knowledge of how the healthcare system works is very, very helpful. So that was in my favor in terms of dealing with the medical bills. However, it was very stressful because since I was the patient, but I was also the person to troubleshoot the medical bills because I was much better at it than my husband. So my husband could pay them, keep the accounts running. Like I said, he was still working, so he was trying to bring in money. But for example, I had to be hospitalized due to a complication. And I don't remember the details of the problem, but there was some sort of problem, and I ended up getting a bill. I believe the insurance had denied the hospital stay. Well, I could tell as soon as I got that gigantic bill for, one night in the hospital, again, it was like $50,000, that they had just denied it as unnecessary. I knew that was ridiculous. So, I'm the patient, but I had to go in person to the place, try to work it out. And I think for me, I'm thinking to myself, this is very stressful. I'm exhausted. I'm the patient, and I'm having to, go down the hall, find the right person. That person's not there, talk to a different person. We also lived out of town from where I was getting my treatment. So then you start the process, but then we ended up driving home. So then I'm, days after that, just the layers of people you have to talk to, the resubmission, and it ended up being that the surgeon had not billed, or the biller had not put the right code on the bill. So if you don't put the right code, it doesn't get billed the right way, the insurance denies it. So only because I'm a medical person did I understand what, and I basically just called the surgeon personally and said, I need to talk to your biller, give me your biller. And I told the biller, you need to put this code. And they did it. And then, days later, it got sorted out. And I mean, I don't think anybody should have to do that. I don't think a patient should have to do that, because you're sick, you're a patient. And so I survived that. I mean, I don't think I had a bad outcome, but I certainly would have rather been exercising or drinking a protein shake during that time, or relaxing with my child or something, trying to get well. But to me, I thought so many times to myself, if I am struggling and I work in healthcare and I am trying to deal with these bills, God help the person who has no idea why, and they just sort of roll over like a dead cockroach and say, I don't know what to do with this. I have no energy to fight this. I'm just going to declare bankruptcy because I guess my insurance doesn't cover it, and give up. And I mean, to be honest, I actually spent a lot of time just feeling enraged at the healthcare system, which is sort of a useless feeling because, and maybe because I was cooped up on chemotherapy and I had too much time on my hands because I couldn't work. I mean, I definitely know that happened because, when you do have too much time on your hands, you spend a lot of time, idle mind, idle hands. And so I was just so frustrated that I would, that people have to do this. They have to argue for things that they shouldn't have to. So, yeah, all the arguing about the bills, that's unnecessary stress. I mean, that was a big one for me. And I know that that's the case for a lot of people, because since then it's one of the most common things that I field in social media and in groups and in my patients in my day-to-day practice today, which is helping people be advocates for themselves to get the insurance to pay for what it should be paying for, and how to also connect them with groups like yours to get their medical care paid for, or legal help to help get things covered or paid for. because obviously I don't have all the answers. So getting people plugged into the resources they need. And I don't know, it's frustrating and heartbreaking to me, because it's like kicking someone when they're down, when they're the patient, and yet they have to fight this battle on top of their illness.
So Beverly, I agree with everything you just said, except I don't think that chemo was the cause of your rage, because I feel exactly the same way. The fact that these stories are still happening. I was just on a call a couple of weeks ago, and I was telling my story about my $275,000 bill. And I said, I hope that that was 20 years ago and we've done a better job since then. And a woman on the call was like, nope, here's my binder of bills. And so I think, the way that story sort of resolved is very similar to what you were just talking about. My mom spent 2 years fighting with insurance. They would deny it and she would appeal it. And she both had the time, because her employer at the time had given her, leave, had put her on leave so that she could be my caregiver, but also as an oncology nurse, she understood the system, she had the language, and she was able to just stay determined to see this through. But not many people have that. They don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they don't have the expertise. And like you said, we've seen this over and over and over in our young adult community. A lot of times young adults are just in this position of, fear, first of all, and anxiety and stress. And so they essentially either put their fingers in their ears because they just cannot deal with the bills of this size, or they pay it at every expense, right? At the expense of their retirement account, at the expense of their credit card, and all of that has implications going forward. And so, I think to answer your question, Kate, there's so much at play here that makes it difficult. And I would also add, it's not just the medical bills. I think what most people forget about is that, like Beverly was talking about, if you have to be away from work, now you have lost income, right? You have additional bills. You still have to pay for the everyday things like everybody else, groceries and utilities, and if you have a car, student loan payments or whatever. But then, by the way, once you're finished with treatment, probably you're going to have to stay on prescriptions for a while. You have to go to follow-up appointments. There's so many ways that this issue of financial toxicity just extends for much longer than most people realize. And I think the farther along we get, the harder it gets to catch up. And so I think part of the reason I'm so grateful to be part of this conversation is that we can do better. We can do better as patient advocates. We can do better as providers. We can do better as patients in bringing up some of these conversations and raising awareness of just how broken this system is, so that we can figure out how to communicate more effectively, communicate earlier. I think the last thing I'll say about this is that one of the things that we see in the many, many grant applications that we've gotten over the years is that young adults especially, and I'm sure this is true, people of all ages, I just don't hear from people of all ages. So from our young adult community, people are operating, they're making decisions out of panic. They go to the pharmacy and there's a $500 copay and they either skip the medication or they hand over their credit card. And both ways are bad, right? They get a $50,000 bill or a $300,000 bill in the mail and they panic and they just put it aside, or they cash in their retirement. I mean, there's so many ways that I think we can prevent people from being blindsided from these bills. And if they're not blindsided by these bills, then we can help them better manage them.
That definitely makes sense. And just thinking about what you both just talked about and all of your past experiences, is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew during treatment? Beverly, if you want to go first.
Well, so one of the things that in hindsight, so since disability and disability benefits were such a big part of my family's survival through it, and even after, I wish that I had been a little bit more educated about it from the get-go. And it was fine while I was on full disability, but what I did not fully understand or research well was getting integrated back into the workforce. And I think that it would have been better if I had maybe had a little bit of guidance on that, and also had sat down to look at the numbers in terms of, and really understand how the plans work, because I think there are some generalizations in how they work, and then each policy also works differently. And what I mean by that is, typically, well, there's a couple things. One, the counselors that the disability insurance assigns to you, they're not really your counselors, they're the company's counselors. And so that's an important thing to understand. And I kind of knew that, but I didn't really appreciate that. In other words, they're there for the interest of the company, not for you, the person. And so I think it would have been good if I had been able to reach out to an organization that would help me advocate for myself better, because I would have been able to, probably, in hindsight, I should have stayed on disability longer than I did, to put it in a nutshell, because I did stay on partial, I came back in a graded fashion and I stayed on partial disability, but I think that it would have been healthier for me to actually stay on partial disability longer. But because I didn't understand all the ins and outs, and there's a little bit of, it's a little hard to describe, but these forms are very formulaic in terms of how the doctors have to fill them out, and how much you can and can't do. And it depends on what type of job you do. I mean, a construction worker has certain things that they can do, and a doctor has certain things that they can do. And so it's a partnership between what the doctor fills out and then what you fill out, and then you have to do these interviews. But the bottom line is, I didn't know how to protect myself and advocate for myself in terms of when I was ready to go back to work. And I wish that I had been able to talk to somebody, a counselor who was used to this, who could advise me on how to protect myself. And so when I only probably had about 8 weeks of part-time work, and I really needed more like 6 months. And then when I came back, I actually ended up doing a whole bunch of night shift. And it was, I mean, that just isn't, number one, night shift is really hard on anybody, but it's, I mean, you can imagine that was just a disaster. I mean, I was not ready to be doing that. It was not good for my body. So, I mean, it is what it is, and I'm here. I got through it, and, slowly got better. But one of the things that I advocate for now, when people ask me and talk to me and I'm in these kinds of discussions, is, again, reach out to the organizations, get some get information, get counseling, learn about your benefits, learn about disability, learn about, legal help, educate yourself so that you can protect yourself and advocate for yourself.
I think, again, by all accounts, I was incredibly lucky. We had support coming in from friends and family. I had my parents who were advocating for me at every turn. I had my mom fighting this bill. When I was able to come back to Boston, I had a friend who was looking for a roommate. I had another friend whose company was hiring. So I think on a sort of practical and financial level, I was as fortunate as I could have been. I didn't face a lot of the challenges that I easily could have, that so many other people do. But what I can say is that I wish that more people now knew how many resources are out there, because I was diagnosed in 99. I feel a little bit like a dinosaur saying that there was no social media at that time. And, it wasn't as easy to access resources. And there also weren't that many resources at that time. But now there are so many more than anyone realizes. And all the things you just mentioned, Beverly, legal help, counseling, financial counseling, advocacy. I mean, there are so many incredible resources out there that are easy to find if people know to search for them. And so I think, if those organizations had existed, I'm not sure I even would have known about them. And that's my greatest hope for people going through treatment now, is that they know that there is support out there. They feel empowered to find it, or they have the people in their corner that can excuse me, find them for them, and there are so many ways that these organizations can support people so that they're not declaring bankruptcy, they're not damaging their credit, and they are just more empowered to go forward. And so I think that's really one of the things that I know it doesn't totally answer your question because the organizations didn't exist at the time. But we've heard it over and over that people are just so lost and the challenges are so great. And I mean, the anxiety that results just prevents them from being able to do anything about it.
And also, since you are both still so involved in the cancer community, we would love to hear what you both are doing today within the community, and based on your interactions, what do you think is most challenging for the individuals you work with as it relates to their medical bills and affording treatment?
So I'll go first. I'm most active in the cancer supportive care and chemotherapy supportive care. And so what that means is the medical community and patient advocate community that is concerned with quality of life during cancer treatment. So I'm not an oncologist, I'm a family physician and a hospitalist. And I do take care of cancer patients when they come in the hospital for other reasons. Frequently that's being hospitalized because of dehydration or malnutrition, or often I might be the first person to actually diagnose their cancer. During the end of my period of disability, when I had too much time on my hands, I wrote a book called Braving Chemo. And this book is about how to care for yourself during chemotherapy. And it's targeted at adults or adult caregivers of people who are going through chemotherapy. And it's to teach people practical tips for staying hydrated, what to eat, how to care for yourself so that you can tolerate your treatment and hopefully get all of your treatment. So it's an information book, like a patient education book. So I've been trying to distribute this book and work within the other cancer support communities around, mostly in the United States, but also around the world. And there's a cancer support community organization called MASK. I've been involved with them, and also ASCO, which is the association, the Oncology Association, various oncologists that are also interested in supportive oncology, and various patient groups as well that are interested in this and interested in helping to teach people how to care for themselves so that they can have improved quality of life during their cancer treatment. It's a lesser known part of oncology because what gets all the big press is when a new drug comes out and the studies and how effective it is. But I think many patient advocates, especially those in the metastatic or late stage cancer, are starting to realize, hey, it's great if you kill the tumor, but if the patient ends up half dead, they have to live the rest of their life in that state. So we really need to figure out how to improve the quality of life for people and minimize side effects, because we have to live with this body. So it's an area that's really growing and increasing. So very excited about that. And there is some fantastic research being done. So I think the second part of your question was to getting back to financial toxicity. So the way it relates to financial toxicity is many of these fancy new drugs, as they are approved, these are $1 million drugs. Immunotherapy, for example, is fantastic, especially for my cancer, triple negative breast cancer, some of the blood cancers. Samantha may have keep her ear on the science for this one. These drugs cost thousands and thousands of dollars every month. And so they may be not covered at all or partially covered. So this is the kind of drug that, and the other thing is there's a bias between IV chemotherapy and oral chemotherapy. So Oral chemotherapy often is not covered the way IV is. So the patient goes and picks it up, and it literally is $3,000 out of pocket for the patient. And that's, I mean, that is ludicrous. That is nobody can afford that except the 1%. So, I mean, this is a huge problem. And so these are the kind of things that come up in these patient advocate groups and chats and support groups, and we're all trying to work on it. So that's what I've been doing.
No, I think you brought up a really good point, Beverly. And part of the reason that I appreciate that financial toxicity has become a more understood and used term is that, Beverly, you said if you kill the tumor, but the person is half dead, then that's something they need to manage. I think the same can be said if you save the body, but the person is bankrupt, right? I mean, there are financial implications for so many years. And so we need to be able to deal with that. And I think using this term financial toxicity sort of places it on the same plane as other clinical side effects that everybody's watching for. And so, 20 years ago, I didn't know that was a thing. Nobody did, I think. But I did know that I was incredibly fortunate to have all of the people in my corner that weren't going to let me really struggle in that way. Like I mentioned, I had a friend who helped me get a job. I had a friend who was looking for a roommate. My parents advocated. I was covered by my mom's insurance. I mean, on every level, I just didn't have the financial struggles that I could have. But it became really clear to me as I started to meet other young adults that without any of those supports, like I said before, things look a lot different. And so in 2003, I created an organization called the Samfund, and it was designed to help young adults pay their bills. I was 25 years old. I didn't have a strategic plan. I didn't really have any business starting a nonprofit, but I had really smart people around me. And I knew that if young adults had a little bit of help paying their bills, then maybe things would look a little brighter. That was my business plan. I'm not very proud of it because it was not something that I thought all the way through. But I also knew that I didn't know how to run a nonprofit. And so I reached out to everyone around me who did. And I had the best people around me, and they believed in my idea, and they believed in just sort of our collective ability to lift people up, right? If they didn't have people in their immediate circle that could help them, then maybe if we could help, and honestly, in the same way that Help Hope Lived at that time supported me and my family, then we could change the trajectory for people going forward. And so really what we did for about 15 years was we raised money to give out money. That was our model. And we provided just about $2 million to young adults across the country with all diagnoses for all sorts of things. So living expenses, medical expenses, family building expenses, because infertility is so common within the young adult community that the cost of IVF or adoption or any number of ways that young adults choose to start a family are really, really expensive. And so we've helped with that. Things like gym memberships and car payments and groceries and the things that people most often forget about, but pile up quickly. We were able to help with that. And 2 years ago, we actually merged with an organization called Expect Miracles Foundation. And we've been able to do even more in the 2 years since we merged, which has been really rewarding. So it took us about 15 years to give out our first 2 million. And we just announced recently that in the 2 years since the merge, we've awarded an additional $1 million in Samfund grants. And so we've really been able to sort of position ourselves for growth because unfortunately, the need is growing really, really quickly. And so one of the other things that we've been able to do now that we're a bigger team and we have greater capacity as an organization is use what we've learned, use the insight, use the data, share the stories to be able to inform change. And so we've had some really incredible opportunities to partner with clinicians and researchers and ASCO and, all sorts of national and global organizations to bring this perspective of the young adult experience, specifically as it relates to financial toxicity, and put it in front of an audience that can actually do something about it, because I think our grants program is incredibly helpful. I think it also is a drop in the bucket for most people. Sometimes it can turn things around if someone has their rent paid for a couple months and they can kind of regroup. And so I don't mean to minimize the importance of the grants, but I think we're able to help with some of the bills some of the time. And this group of young adults has so many bills all of the time. And so instead of continuing to sort of put a Band-Aid on it by awarding grants as fast as we can, I think what's equally important is that we have better protections in place. And so we've been involved in legislative advocacy efforts. We've published some of our work and really are trying to share the insight that we've gained in 20 years, with people at all parts of this equation. Because I think in order to really affect change, we need everyone at the table.
What you both are doing is so amazing. And for people who may be experiencing financial toxicity due to cancer or maybe another medical diagnosis, do you have any advice or resources on how they can maybe minimize their financial struggle that could be caused by medical bills?
Sure, I can take this one first. So I think I have two thoughts. The first, as far as resources go, I didn't learn until recently that hospitals have financial assistance programs because they have to. And a lot of hospital websites do not make it easy to find. They do not make it easy to find a phone number, a contact person, but all the information is there. And so you have to get a little bit creative sometimes when you're on the hospital site. Sometimes it's called financial assistance. Sometimes it's called patient advocacy. Sometimes it's called patient support programs. It goes by a lot of names, but the point is that within certain parameters, and assuming that most people, when they go through treatment, experience a loss of income, are faced with high medical bills, there is support available from within the hospital. So that's the first thing. And I think as far as advice or just words of support that I would offer, I would say that it's so important to remember that it's not your fault. I think, as Beverly talked about earlier, we're all trying to operate within a system that is entirely broken. And even now, I'm so enraged that this is still the conversation that we're having. But I think what's most important and sometimes what's most paralyzing for people is the shame that they did something wrong to create this financial situation, or that they're not able to pay these bills, and the guilt of what it does to their families and their families' financial health and opportunities going forward. I mean, we hear these stories every single day. And I would love to just be able to tell everyone who's feeling that it's not your fault. It's our sort of collective responsibility, I think, to do better and to advocate for change and to prevent these $300,000 bills from being sent in the first place. But until that happens, the shame and anxiety that goes along with it can be as debilitating as the bills themselves. And I think it's really important to remember that this is not any individual's fault.
I would echo that absolutely. There's no shame in asking for help. That's something that I tell people. I post about that. I write about that a lot. I asked for help. That's the only way I survived my treatment and my illness. I still ask for help. My family got a lot of help. So I completely agree with you, Sam. It's very important. I mean, within my hospital, we have social workers, case managers, financial advisors. So definitely start there. I would say for the cancer community, some good resources specific to cancer. If you live in an area that has there's a group called Cancer Support Community. They're all over the country. In where I live in Texas, we actually only have one physical branch, and that's in the Dallas area, but many other areas of the country have more branches. And they have extremely broad and deep resources, financial and otherwise. And then, of course, your organization, Expect Miracles, Help Hope Live, if you want to do a fundraising, is fantastic. And I think, Catherine, you can talk more about this, but many people in those situations will be eligible for emergency Medicaid. And that's something that also some people might feel shame about because there's so much stigma with receiving benefits, but that's what the benefits are for. They are for emergencies. And so I think, you just have to understand that when you have serious illness, it's an emergency, and that's what those systems are for. So and this is something I think for young people, when they get sick, they have trouble sort of realizing that they've crossed over, like, but I was always healthy. Well, yes, and now you're not. That's what's happening now, and that's really tough. It's like it's a change in your reality, and it's difficult emotionally, it's difficult physically, it's frustrating, it's a shock, but that also applies to, and this is why you have to reach out and get help and get these resources, and it's okay to need help and to use them. So emergency Medicaid, using these organizations. Oh, there's another one specifically for cancer called Triage Cancer. They're more of a legal aid, but again, they can connect people to what they need. For example, if somebody needs legal help because their company is not giving them maybe the time off they deserve or need, or what have you, then they can give advice on that. So Help Hope Live, Triage Cancer, Cancer Support Community, Expect Miracles, and there are others, and I'm blanking now on but those are my top picks to start with.
I would add also Cancer and Careers.
Yes,
even though they don't provide financial assistance, they can help people navigate the employment challenges. So whether it's coming off of treatment and going back to work, or trying to work while you're undergoing treatment. And, you know, when you talk about stigma and shame, I mean, I think people show up for a job interview and they're so embarrassed by a gap on their resume, or aren't sure what they are supposed to disclose, or what employers aren't allowed to ask. And Cancer and Careers is a wonderful resource for helping to navigate those things.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, we, obviously see some resistance in regards to fundraising because people don't want to ask for help, but, that's why we're here. And we always encourage people just to give us a call and talk to our coordinators and kind of just have them help them navigate just that initial process. But definitely asking for help is difficult, and something that we find with our clients a lot that they tend to struggle with. We did get one question from the audience, and the question is, what is one thing you would tell a young adult today about how to navigate their post-treatment life?
I'm smiling because I'm pretty sure that question came in from my dad. Hi, Dad. I think, we hear from a lot of young adults who, when they finish the treatment, I mean, their experience is a lot like mine was 20 years ago, where I think because cancer is such a physically obvious disease in a lot of cases, when you don't look like a cancer patient anymore, everyone around you is celebrating and you're supposed to be so grateful and all of that. And yes, absolutely. I have never met a cancer survivor who is not grateful to be here, but it's not at the exclusion of whatever stress comes up because of financial toxicity or social interactions or physical changes or any of these other ways that survivorship is really, really hard. And so I think the advice that we do give, and the advice that I would give to any young adults that are listening, is seek out your people. It's hard because a lot of hospitals don't have young adult specific clinics. And so, most hospitals are still sort of split between pediatric and adult. And when you're in that late teens, 20s, early 30s age range, it can be really hard to find your peers. And I think even in all of these years of hindsight, what made my experience really challenging wasn't necessarily the diagnosis and the treatment. I mean, that was hard, but it was not being able to find my peers afterwards that I could relate to. I had wonderful friends. I had the best support system, but I didn't have that many people who understood some of the unique experiences that I had as a young adult cancer survivor. And so when I talked about starting the Samfund in 2003, it was because I went to a conference in Boston, and it was called I'm Too Young for This. And it was just for young adults who had gone through treatment. And I don't remember much about who spoke or what I learned or anything, but I remember vividly the feeling of walking into a room and finding my people, not having to explain things, not having to put disclaimers on things, not having to say, well, of course I'm grateful to be alive, but also it's really hard to deal with all the stuff. They got it. And I think that the best thing now is how easy it is to connect with people because of the internet and social media and online groups. So yes, there are a lot of organizations that are providing support to young adults, and all of those are important. But I think even before that, it's even more critical and more valuable to find your people, to, so that you don't feel like the only one in the world going through this, and you don't feel like a total failure as a 20-something because you can't get your life started. And to find the people that can validate that for you and take that level of stress off of you, then frees you up to go find the resources that you need and to ask the questions that you need answered. But I think finding the people who make you feel less alone in this really, really challenging experience is such an important first step.
I don't have a lot to add to that. I would absolutely agree. And I think that it's also true. I mean, I was more middle-aged at my diagnosis and treatment, but the same holds true because I was still in those years of career and, raising young children. And so I didn't have any close friends who had cancer. Now, a few years on, more of my friends have now had cancer because now I'm 50. So the older you get, the more common cancer and other serious diseases are. That's just the way life is. That's the way the human body is. But I agree with everything Sam has just said. And to give yourself some space and forgiveness to have bad days, because I feel like popular culture or the general perception of cancer treatment is that you have it, you get treated, and then you're done. And so, and I think most people, at least I, even as a physician, I did not appreciate how much, how long the tail is in terms of recovery and survivorship. And so I think just being able to forgive yourself in the sense of forgive yourself for that frustration of like, why am I still so tired? Or I had such a good day yesterday and today I'm just having a crap day and I can't remember anything, or whatever it is, whether it's lingering side effects of treatment or what have you, just trying to be patient with yourself and being aware of that will go a long way.
I love what you just said too about letting yourself have a bad day, because my mom and I have laughed a lot over the years at how big my gift cards were to Barnes and Noble at that time, because everybody kept buying me these books that were all about keeping a positive attitude. And if you keep a positive attitude, then you'll be fine. And I'm all for being optimistic. I'm all for counting my blessings. All of that stuff is true. And also having cancer really sucks on some days. And so if we're constantly feeling like we have to feel positive about this or else we're going to die, that's a lot of pressure, first of all. And the less we let those feelings out, the more they're going to come back to bite us. So I love the way you just said that you got to let yourself have a bad day, because I think then it's easier to get back up and keep going. But if we're constantly trying to smile for everyone around us and, be grateful for all of the things we can be grateful for without leaving room to just cry for the losses and cry for the challenges and just grieve the change in our stories, then it's just going to come back later. So I love the way you put that. I think it's so important.
Thank you.
And kind of related to that, do either of you have recommendations on how to lighten the mental burden? Like any peace that you found or any happy place that you kind of went to when you were going through, your cancer treatment and that experience?
I remember there were two things that I remember from that time. One is that I had a meditation CD. I just dated myself again. I had a portable CD player. But anyway, I had this one meditation and I had to go through a lot of them to find the one that I liked, but I found one that I liked. And when I was coming up for a scan, or when I couldn't sleep, or when I was in those moments of incredible stress, I would listen to it, and it just brought my breathing back to a more normal level. And so that was really helpful. And also I was really fortunate because I was treated in a hospital where they had a lot of complementary services, and we took advantage of all of them. And so I had massage therapy, and we had music therapy, and we had nutritional counseling. I mean, all the things that they offered, we said yes to. And I think all of them were really, really valuable. And so, I think it all sort of connects to being able to focus on things that are not just chemo and that are not just, the physical ailments that you're dealing with on a particular day, but really taking care of the other parts of you too, and the ones that, you can't necessarily see. I mean, I think the greatest support that I had at that time was my psychologist. I had known her my whole life, and I had connected with a psychiatrist in the hospital who very much put me in the box of my diagnosis and did not treat me as a person. He just treated me as my cancer. So I didn't stay with him for that long. But I went back to a therapist who had known me. And so instead of treating me as the cancer, she treated me as someone with the cancer. And to have her as a sounding board and to be able to navigate some of those challenges really just protected my mental health in a really, really important way. So I think, being able to find the support for the things that doctors sometimes aren't asking about, the mental health and the, just sort of your emotional health and spiritual health, if that's relevant, and, just all of the other stuff, basically.
I'm glad you mentioned, Sam, about being able to access all of the complementary, what we call complementary services at a large cancer center, because those are fantastic. And that is my dream, is to bring all of that to the smaller centers. Where I live and work, which is in Brownsville, Texas, we don't have a large cancer center. We have some smaller oncology offices, and we do have people who do psychotherapy, and we do have independent massage therapy places, but we don't have any of the large integrated cancer centers like that. So everything here is DIY. So I mean, it's fantastic if you can get that, but I'll share what I did, which is DIY. So in between my chemo and then also in between my surgeries, I found that I did a lot of walking when it wasn't 100 degrees. So it was early in the morning. We actually live on a quiet street. It's almost a cul-de-sac. So I would just go out, and not for very long because I was very, very anemic during the last half of my chemotherapy, but just for maybe 10 minutes in the early morning. So it was really quiet. I did that quite a bit. And kind of just to, again, get out of the house, clear my mind. I would look at the trees. Sometimes I would take photographs. I also started looking at recipes. I couldn't eat a whole lot. I mean, on chemo, like, things taste weird. You're nauseous all the time. But I was kind of, I think it was almost like fantasy, like, I'm going to plan what I'm going to eat 6 months from now. So I had some friends who had given me some cookbooks. One friend gave me a rice cooker. So I started reading the cookbook as if it was a book. So I was marking it and kind of making lists of things, and, to pass the time. And it got my mind off of thinking, perseverating about chemo or being sick or anything like that. And maybe it was kind of fantasizing about what I was going to cook, 6 months later. And then the other thing was, I had just finished chemo and had surgery when the Star Wars movie came out at the end of 2015. So I was able to go with my family, and we were very, super nerdy, like my kids dressed up and like as the TIE fighter pilots, and we just did a lot of movie watching. And the weather for us anyway was very cold, which means it was like below 70 or something. And bundle up in blankets, and we had to get our kids caught up. So we watched like all of the previous, what it was, 6 Star Wars. And I think for me, immersing myself in the movies for that time was also, I mean, it was just an escape, from what was going on. And I remember that time with the kids, especially at that age, because they were 9 and 10 when I was diagnosed. And it was the perfect time to do that, to watch Star Wars. And so it seems so ironic to have felt so bad, like physically, but yet I have such good memories of that. So what you're saying about doing something to take care of your soul and your spirit, like somehow doing that. I mean, it sounds almost silly to say that watching the movies could do that, but I really think it did. And it ended up being, in spite of everything, it ended up being really good family time.
Yeah, Star Wars is a great distraction.
I
love that. I love that that's what you got into. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Just to kind of wrap up the conversation, this conversation will be is being recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube page. I just really want to thank you both so much for being with us today and sharing all your valuable experiences and insights with us. Also wanted to mention to definitely check out the book Braving Chemo by Beverly, and check out the Samfund nonprofit founded by Sam. So definitely do those 2 things. So thank you all so much for joining us. Keep an eye out for our next Hope Talk, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you both so much.